Thank you for joining us this afternoon on a Becker's Dental Review webinar related to dental practice management. We've got two magnificent panelists this afternoon, Joe Feldstein and Debbie Seidel, and I'll ask Joe and Debbie to take a moment and give us some of your background. Debbie, why don't I start with you?
Thank you, Scott. Well, I have a long background in dentistry. I started as a teenager working as a dental assistant, helping some dentists start at their practice. But my core foundation was in academia as an assistant professor at the University of Southern California, and I co-taught practice management to the senior dental students there. In 2000, I founded Dental Practice Solutions. We take a holistic approach and work with the entire team so that the team is driving the practice and the dentist can do what they do best, which is be that clinician.
And Debbie, could you just do me a favor quickly and make sure I've got your name, the full name correctly for our audience, and your company's name?
Sure. I like to be called Debbie, and my last name is hyphenated, Seidel Bidke.
Thank you so much. And you're the CEO of Dental Practice Solutions. Joe, can I ask you to introduce yourself? I know you've had a magnificent career at Pacific Dental and have been there for now 13, 14 years and been in the dental practice management space, or DSO space before that, but a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been 14 years with Pacific Dental Services and in a number of different roles. And prior to that, I was with 3M Dental Company. So I worked out of St. Paul and out here in California in various sales and marketing positions. In my current role at Pacific Dental Services, I serve basically the training, the clinical environment for PDS. So that starts with brand awareness in the dental schools and residencies. We support the onboarding of GP and specialty dentists. We oversee the clinical training platform and help dentists who seek to own a dental practice. As you know, PDS is a dental support organization. And so that's basically what I do today.
And how big is PDS today?
Yeah, great question. Mm-hmm. So PDS supports 635 plus dental offices. There are over 10,000 employees and supported clinicians in the PDS environment, and we're growing rapidly. We're in 19 states.
And what was the size when you joined 13, 14 years ago? Just to give people a sense of the growth.
So about 65. So about 65 offices about 14 years ago, and primarily based in Southern California. We're just starting to get in Las Vegas, Nevada, and shortly thereafter we went into Arizona.
Fantastic. Now 19 states, 635 offices. Let me ask Debbie, your thoughts. I mean, there's been great growth in dental service organizations, dental practice management over the last 10 years or so, and it's really accelerated over the last 5 to 10 years. The numbers are all over the place in terms of the guesstimate of how many dentists are still completely an independent practice versus a DCO, DSO versus a dental sort of more of a ownership model. What's your sense of the future of dental practice management as an industry? Debbie, can you comment on that?
Sure. I think practice management is alive and it's just going very well. I believe that it's more important than ever to have practice management and these systems and processes in place. A company like Pacific Dental Services cannot exist and multiply like Joe just mentioned unless they have systems and processes that everybody knows what's expected and how things operate. Smaller practices need help because they're not large enough to have the good internal managers and they don't have time to manage. So these larger practices such as Pacific Dental Services, they need to have time management and internal management. They have so much increased complexity that they need to have these systems all in order. And
Joe, let me just touch with you for a second. The dental practice management business, right now, I don't know if you have a guesstimate as the amount that's been consolidated versus where it's going. Any sense on where dental practice management is going?
Yeah, so I would agree with Debbie, but what we got a pretty good handle, I think, on what's going on. We understand that there are somewhere around 1,000 DSOs today, and DSOs represent roughly 20% of the marketplace today. And so I'm with you in terms of growth. What is the one word? The one word is growth. Debbie nailed it in that this is a fast growing segment of dentistry. It will continue to grow rapidly, and I think the primary reason for it is dentists are self-selecting into DSOs.
And let me ask you a question about that, because there's two things I want to follow up with you on that issue. If I went back 5 to 15 years, you saw so much conflict between the dentist and the DSOs. And not that there's not still plenty of conflict, of course there is, but it seems like there's not nearly the amount that there was some time ago. Any sense of why that's evolved like it's evolved? And would you agree with that observation?
Yeah, I would say so. So about 15 years ago, I was with 3M, and at that point in time, I came to a decision point. I'm like, you know what? This is real. And Pacific Dental Services, I thought, had one of the leading models, if not the leading model in the space. And to your point, there was some conflict. There was some friction between dentists and the DSOs themselves. I think the one thing that's become super clear, though, over the last 15 years is that the DSO does not practice dentistry. I think that is probably what is really defining things. I think at some point in time, many dentists, not knowing what DSOs were intent on doing, thought, well, maybe the DSO might cross that line. But in fact, what we've seen is that the DSO doesn't cross the line. They provide the business support services that dentists want so much, allowing the dentist to practice the dentistry that basically is fulfilling their heart's desire.
Now, I'm going to ask you another question before I go back to Debbie. You've got the role now of training and onboarding and recruiting dentists. And what people might not realize is that in the large DSOs, that's one or two most important jobs there are today. And can you explain a little bit more about how your company prioritizes that and what you all do and so forth?
Yeah, well, and it's a passion of mine, so I appreciate the question. We are a platform for dentists of all ages, races, ethnicities. It doesn't really matter where they're coming from, but they actually are self-selecting into the PDS environment for two reasons. One is the ownership model that exists here, right? It's just such a fantastic model where every practice has a practicing owner dentist locally. That's a really big deal, and it's very significant because what it also enables is it enables then anybody who's on the outside to come in, practice with a practicing owner doctor, and benefit from their mentorship, benefit from their experience, benefit from the proven technology in that environment.
Let me ask you a question along those lines. If about 20% of all dentists out of maybe 200,000 are now either with a DSO or employed by a related group, is the trend of people coming out of dental school much, much more open to going to work with a DSO-related practice than it was a few years ago?
Yeah, based on the people that we've got coming through our orientation program, I'd say absolutely. There's some schools that literally 80 to 90% of the students are self-selecting into a DSO environment.
Gotcha. So that much. Fascinating. Debbie, let me ask you a question. Sort of the top trends you see today in dental practice, whether for the independent dental practice or DSO related, what are the top trends you're seeing currently?
I'm seeing that the dentists need to have increased communication skills to have patients accept the treatment plan that's been presented. And also what I find myself working on with our young doctors is their sense of leadership so that their team members can lead them, to help them, support them to do their clinical dentistry.
And what are the biggest challenges in practices today? Is it how much is managed in other medical specialties with independent specialists or specialty groups? Managed care contracting in many cases has become a huge issue. Is that a huge issue with the Delta Dentals of the world and the different managed care plans? What are the top 3 or 4 issues that dentists are facing today in terms of maintaining their practice, relatively profitable?
Well, you just said one of the hot buttons. One of the biggest challenge is their patients being insurance driven. And that's a huge issue that we as practice management consultants deal with. And that's what we're constantly working with our clients on, is how to speak. That's the communication, how to speak to your patients so the insurance doesn't drive what they accept for treatment.
What percentage of patients now, taking Medicaid aside, and I want to ask you both about Medicaid in a moment, what percentage of dentists or patients now have insurance coverage versus not? In the old days, it was sort of self-pay or even HSA. What percentage now are covered by some kind of dental insurance?
I believe our client base is 90% of their patients are insurance-based.
And Joe, would you give me your thoughts on that? Is that the same that you see with your company? Is it that much insurance-based, or is it a real mix?
I'd say it's a little less insurance-based. We're seeing a lot of folks come in who are cash paying, looking for insurance solutions, looking for discount fees, if you will, with different, so they're not necessarily insured by their employer. But one number that we look at very closely is what percent of the reimbursement is coming from patient pockets. And in our environment, that's over 70%.
So it's still a huge amount through that the patient's paying themselves. And so how do you manage that? Is it much more, collection on the front end, or how do dental practices manage the fact that's, yes, it's been a huge percentage by patient pay. Is that harder to deal with today, easier to deal with today, or the same?
Are you asking Debbie? Joe? Are you asking Joe?
Go ahead, Debbie. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's very challenging for our young dentists to sequence the treatment in a way that patients are willing to say yes and pay. But we have a process that we're teaching with our clients where the patients are wanting what they need. And because they want it, there are incentives for them to pay, especially if you're contracted with an insurance, you can't do this. But when there is a cash option, we have a method that will get patients to pay up front, which is what will drive the profits in the practice and drive their production monthly. So it's just the doctor's leadership, and it goes back to their communication. And I see that the newer doctors who are graduating, I see the curriculums have 4 terms of treatment planning in the dental school curriculums, but they're not real confident in explaining that so that patients want what they need. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. Let me ask you another question. I really want to ask you both 2 questions. I've heard you loud and clear on the physicians, dentists trying to figure out the sort of whole mix of communication skills, marketing skills. In the old days, a dental graduate might come out of school, work with a senior dentist for a couple of years, and either stay there or go on their own, and they would do a ton of marketing or communication through word of mouth. What I hear you saying is that's become a lot more complicated today, and many of them aren't prepared for that type of entrepreneurial effort in the same way. And that's one of the things I sort of hear you saying, at least in part through communication skills. The other question I'd love to ask is each of you, and Debbie, I'll start with you, the places where dental practices do their best revenue-wise. Where are they generating incremental improved revenues? What are the best spots for that? And Joe, I'll ask you the same question. And then I'd also like to ask you, how many of your practices, and is it very state dependent, how many of your practices are very Medicaid dependent?
Okay.
So let me start with the question of sort of best areas to increase revenues, or you've seen revenues go well the last few years. And Joe, I'd love to ask you the same question.
So you're asking me to start first, Scott?
If that's okay, and then we'd ask you to cover those two questions, and then to go to Joe really in the same question. Sort of where is improvements in revenues coming from, specific procedures, specific things dentists are doing, what's driving revenue improvement, and then second is just getting an understanding of the makeup of. I know some of the DSO companies are very Medicaid state driven, some are not, and just curious on some of the observations on that.
Okay. So first of all, I really love your question because my background is hygiene, and I believe that hygiene drives the practice. And without a solid hygiene department, you're going to notice that doctor's schedule isn't going to be full. And I believe that it's the hygienist understanding how to sequence that. Hopefully they have 1 hour with their patient routinely, at least twice a year. And they're looking around and showing the patient what they see the patient needs. And they're collaborating with that patient so the patient wants what they see they need. And it's getting the patient to dream about what they would like their teeth to look like. I believe that the larger treatment plans like implant, a lot of our doctors today, even the young doctors coming out of school, are wanting to focus on implants, and implant dentistry, I believe, is the future. I'm seeing more dentists providing implants than ever before. And I believe that that is a high production area, but I believe it's driven from the hygiene department.
So I heard you say two things. Implants are a great profit generator, a revenue generator, and more dentists are in the implant area. The other thing I heard you said is it's that in terms of developing, growing a practice, having a great practice, the hygiene department and great hygienists are so important because they're such a part of the patient communication team, patient contact team, and what the patient really feels and sees. So important that that's actually viewed as an asset, not just a cost of the practice.
That is what can drive a practice to great success.
Gotcha. Joe, a couple of your thoughts. Debbie mentioned dental hygienist, and the implant arena. What areas do you see as triggers for growth in dental practice revenue?
Yeah, great question, and I appreciate Debbie's response. At PDS, in our supported practices, actually, it's slightly different, all right? And it's because of the unique offering, number one, of the owner-dentist model, and the fact that they're an owner, and their clinical culture is driven based on their beliefs and what's best for patients. So that's fundamental in our organization. But in addition to that, what we're seeing making a difference for patients such that it changes their behavior, increases the level of loyalty, and increases the level of referrals is this comprehensive nature of the practices that we support. And what I mean by that, when I say comprehensive, in many of the practices that we support, you'll have all of the surgical specialties such as endodontics, perio, oral surgery, hygiene. Those will all be resident in that practice. So when a patient comes in, they'll be able to benefit from those services. In addition to that, there is a large cross-section, somewhere around 35 to 40% of our practices that have on-site orthodontics. And again, that additional service now opens the patient up to having all of their dental needs met in one location. And that is proving to be a powerful attractor to patients and a powerful reason for them to stay and refer.
So you would really mention, as I hear you, two things, really having pretty comprehensive suite of services. So it's not really one thing that's driving the revenue growth. So that one comment. The second comment you mentioned, which is a tie into the first one, is the expansion into orthodontics has also been really powerful, just because, particularly the 15 and under community, pediatrics, the orthodontics is just a big part of revenue source for dental income, or can be. And so I heard you mention the two things, the sort of orthodontics and just having a comprehensive suite of services. What about, you go to some dental practices, and, it seems like some dental practices are so crazily aggressive about how many x-rays they want you to do and so forth. And how do you balance the right amount of medical need versus profit drive in your practices and so forth? How do you try and hit this right so that you're doing what's needed, what's really wanted and desired, but hit the right balance on checks and balances on it so you're doing the right thing?
Yeah. And if I may, Scott, I just want to backtrack for one quick second, because I want to go back to the kids and the orthodontics piece. The other thing that PDS does is it supports the largest group of practicing pediatric dentists in America, and that is growing. And the point in that is kids. When you get the kids in the practice, that really fuels growth. And as all three of us know, at least Debbie and I know, that in many cases, kids are not able to get into the practice at an early age. And I think a lot of dentists, they don't think about it too much, but in reality, what we found is the earlier we get them in, the better for the kid, the better for the parent, the better for the practice. So I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. That is a huge avenue of growth for us.
And let me ask you a question. How many practices today, and I don't have a great feel for this, and obviously, from a business perspective, how many practices are truly just pediatric dentist practices versus general dental practices? And is it still, how many are completely mixed versus one or the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing that we know is there are about 7,000 credentialed, if you will, or licensed pediatric dentists in America. And just as a reference point, there are over 80,000 pediatricians in America. And so it's really quite interesting when you do that comparison. There really aren't enough pediatric dentists to go around necessarily. And so
there's 10%. There's literally 10% of the amount of pediatric dentists versus pediatricians.
Yeah.
And we know that everybody sees has to see their dentist, and we know that everybody sees their pediatrician. So you just have a huge mismatch in the amount of pediatric dentists versus and is that mismatch, what drives that limited number of pediatric dentists?
That's a great question. There's 900 pediatric dentists in residency as we speak. Now, it's a 2-year residency, so graduate about 450 a year. And so again, with those that are coming in versus those that are retiring, or exiting the field, it just, generally speaking, it's basically status quo. What's coming in is going out on an annual basis. And so it may be the number of residencies, it may be the number of people that are applying to those residencies. Generally, there are more applicants than there are opportunities.
Gotcha. Just because of residency programs. And is the income for pediatric dentists enough to attract pediatric dentists? Is it just a limit on residency spots? Is that the biggest problem?
Well, the income can be very handsome, to be honest with you. What we've seen with many of the pediatric dentists that we support, that they do very well. And generally, some of the best pediatric practices are those that are just super, super intense on prevention, and they see kids, as soon as that first tooth is popped. And as a result, they're just seeing kids. They're helping mom understand what good home health care looks like. And from that perspective, they don't fall into the epidemic that is caries in primary teeth, and even in just the caries epidemic in general in this country.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so let me ask this question. A company like yours, Joe, you've grown to have 630 plus sites or so. I'm going to ask you two questions. The Medicaid model, or not so much, that you guys pursue? That's one question. And then organic growth or acquisition growth. Where's the growth drive for the big DSOs today?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends, again, to your point, to your earlier point on the DSO. PDS has a very minimal footprint with Medicaid, such that it probably represents less than 1% of the patients that we see. But again, that may not be representative of what other DSOs are doing. So just to be clear on that.
Right. Your business model is not one around the Medicaid. I mean, some are really focused on Medicaid, some are not. And you mentioned a fascinating stat that there's 1,000 different DSOs, but there's probably 20 that have sufficient, significant size that you really judge them one or the other. And of those 20, probably 5 to 7 really Medicaid driven.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
Simplistically.
Pretty accurate.
So Scott, if I may interject, we don't work with the large group practices right currently like PDS, although I just wanted to let you know I have visited PDS as a patient and I had a fabulous experience. So just want to let you know, Joe, that I love your
appreciate that
model there. Yeah, and I understand why people are going in there. I mean, it was like not even $50 as a new patient visit there. So that's a very attractive way to get patients. I wanted to mention that a lot of our clients are young dentists, new grads coming out of school they have a dream of owning their own practice, but they just don't know what it takes to be a business owner, and they have no leadership experience. So the DSO it's very attractive to these young dentists, as well as accepting Medicaid in the very beginning of their startup dental practice. So we're seeing a lot of doctors from across the U.S., I mean, doctors in California all the way over to the East Coast that are startups, and they're actually working at a DSO a couple days a week and also starting up their own practice, accepting Medicaid. So I just wanted to pipe in and say that we are seeing that trend.
And when doctors come out of residency today, are they more focused on, is there just a much higher willingness to join a DSO than there was 5 to 10 years ago? Is that just a perception that you have, Deb? Because you're dealing with very independent physicians or dentists that join DSOs. What's your perspective on the perception of residents coming out?
I love your question, Joe. I've been in dentistry since the 70s. I just told you how old I am now. But I've also been a consultant working with young dentists for 18 years as of 2018. And I have seen more than ever young dentists coming out of dental school, jumping into the DSO and the PDS model. And, you know, some of these doctors do have a dream of having their own practice, but they just don't know what to do. And they're coming out of dental school. I've seen $750,000 in student loans right out of dental school. So that's pretty stressful. Even to go into a pediatric residency, they still already have $750,000 that they owe. So I think that's part of why we're not seeing the pediatric residency numbers and the pediatric dentists. There is a huge gap. I mean, people in my community where I live are always looking for a pediatric dentist for their children, and there are not that many. And I worked originally way back in the 70s as an assistant to a pediatric office, very large practice, but it's stressful. And I think the doctors know that. And I'm talking to doctors in general practice. They're saying, we don't want to see the children. We just don't want the children in our practice. And I think that let
me pick up on that. That's a fascinating point that makes a ton of sense. I mean, in an adult practice, truly adult practice, you've got some adults, and some of the dentists don't want to deal with kids. Some do, some don't. Joe, how do you manage that or look at that? Is that really each individual PC makes their own choice on what they're going to be? You as the DSO provide suggestions, but ultimately they decide whether they're going to open their practice and try and be a more full practice or not. How do you manage that issue?
Yeah, I think it's again another good question. I think though the way that you already somewhat answered it, Scott, it's we call it supported autonomy. What we do as an organization is we continue to bubble to the surface the data, right? The data that basically helps these folks make the decisions, right? basically, again, when it comes to kids, what we're seeing is that when kids are coming into the practice, it feeds ortho. They also bring with them sometimes one set of parents, sometimes two set of parents, sometimes grandparents, sometimes communities come with one or two kids. So it's such what we're seeing in the data, it's a leading indicator of future success. And so we bubble that to the surface, and then as a result, we help the dentists that decide, yes, this is the clinical culture that I want for my practice. We help them build the structure in such that they can see those kids in an environment that, to Debbie's point, generally is stressful, but with the structure that we build in and the processes and the systems that she referenced at the onset, reduces the amount of stress, increases the patient experience such that they're feeling good, the clinician is feeling good, and everybody has a greater sense of purpose. What are we doing? Who are we helping? And how does that matter?
Got it. So it's really trying to help improve the processes for it. First, they've got to make the decision that they'll open the practice in the way that you're trying to convince them with stats and data, and then they have to then you have to help them do so in a way that doesn't overly disrupt the practice, but adds on potential growth opportunities and ways to improve the practice.
Yeah,
that's what I sort of hear you saying.
I would say, and yeah, influence, we definitely want to help them with the data, but ultimately it's their choice, and we have a number of different practices, 635. Many of them operate in a very similar fashion, but many of them are very different and very distinct on the, brand promise into the community.
And so the next question I had for you is, and it's going back to a question I had before, and it relates to your role. I mean, so much of the growth in some of the DSOs I've seen has been organic growth, where they're building new sites, where they're recruiting, and they're adding into existing sites, as opposed to acquisition growth. And we see a lot of private equity funded acquisition growth too. What's the future? Is it organic growth, or is it acquiring existing practice growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's both. For the last 24 years, PDS has grown primarily through the de novo strategy. And what de novo means is we partner with dentists who wish to open a new practice. These dentists generally are associate dentists who work for one of our supported owner dentists. And at that point in time, while they're associates, they're learning, they're ramping, they're building their clinical confidence. They're doing much of what Debbie referenced in terms of understanding how to build trust with patients, because that's what really it comes down to. When their clinical confidence is high, when their ability to build trust with patients is high, now over the course of that time, they've been able to save a little bit of money, and it allows them to purchase into one of these de novo practices. So again, that is what primarily served the growth of PDS for the last 24 years. That being said, acquisition is definitely always on the table, and where it makes sense, it's something that PDS will use. And we've done that where owner dentists might be in a community, or they want to get into a new community, and as a result, they may target a practice, and they're like, they know a dentist who's got a good reputation, has done good clinical care, maybe wanting to join them as an associate or as a partner, or maybe exiting their business, and it's an opportunity for us to support an owner dentist going in there and taking care of the patients of that practice. So that's
it's really, really helpful. I mean, the huge percentage of growth to date has been through what we think of as organic / de novos. You're doing startups with existing dentists rather than buying practices or buying the back office of practices. But as this is accelerated, consolidation has accelerated, some more pressure or thoughts around, and I'm not necessarily talking about PDS, but in the industry, some more thoughts around acquisitions versus solely organic growth. But
Scott, I'd like to shed some light on what I see happening.
That would be great. Thank you.
When I speak to my colleagues who are brokers selling dental practices, it's a really great thought process. And, we have this huge population right now of baby boomers, and they are retiring. Some of them have already retired. They're dentists, and they've sold their practice, and they will continue for the next 10 years plus to sell their dental practice. So I believe that acquisition is just abundant in our future. I think and it's so much easier. when I look back to when I was with those doctors, and it was pediatric practice back in the 70s, I mean, there was no advertisement, and the ADA prohibited you by putting a big sign up in front of your office. You were not allowed to advertise like you can today. And yet the growth of the practice was so much easier back in the 70s and even the 80s. And when you look at what's happening today, it's very tough to start up your own dental practice. So I think acquisition is a good opportunity for a Pacific Dental Service group practice, and even for these other young dentists who have a dream of owning their own dental practice.
Got it. Thank you very much. So I mean, you see a more of a trend towards the acquisition market, plus you also see retiring dentists looking at this as an option as well to make sure they get at least some potential gain out of their practice before they retire, particularly if they haven't built in younger dentists are going to buy their practice and so forth. And of course, the younger dentists never want to buy it for too much money anyways.
Absolutely. I mean, I know dentists who they want to hire the practice management group to come in and build their practice so they can sell to a DSO or group practice.
So I'm going to ask you each one more question. I'm going to correct that. I'm going to ask you each two more questions. First, are there difficult states for dentistry where reimbursement is so bad, or DSOs just have a really hard time? And are there one or two states? I know a couple of years ago, North Carolina was a very difficult state for DSOs. So that's one question. I'll ask each of you. Are there states that are still just have to stay out of? And then second is the biggest threat to dental profit reimbursement. Dental practice is doing okay. What states are no good, if any? And what are what's the biggest threat to dentistry? Joe, do you want to start on that?
Sure. Why don't I take the first question and run with that a little bit? I think
Great.
Generally what we're seeing problematic states are becoming less and less an issue. Basically what we're seeing is legislators, dental boards, they understand the difference between clinical practice, right, which is appropriately licensed and regulated, and the non-clinical business services provided by DSOs. The longer this conversation goes on, the more we engage with folks in an early point of entering a state, the less and less friction we're feeling. I mean, I've been in this space now for 15 years, and there were times where it was somewhat dramatic, right? But we're seeing less and less. And again, when we're able to engage in a meaningful dialogue with both the dental board and some of the state legislators, generally speaking, when they come to understand the services we're providing and how we're supporting, and the fact that the dentists are both self-selecting and frankly pulling our services into these markets, it becomes less of a threat and more of an understood solution to some of the challenges that they face.
And that makes sense. That sounds like part of the maturation of the business, where it's become less of a one-off. The old days, just a few large dental practice management companies that were making huge progress, but then having some tips with some states or different kinds of issues. Now, as it's matured a little bit as an industry, less complete wars with states over whether you can have DSOs or not, it sounds like.
Yeah, I would say so. And again, it goes back to dialogue and transparency. What are we trying to do? And for us, the biggest advocate for us in all of these states is the owner dentists we support. They want to go into these states. They see states where there's maybe low access to care, and they're like, we can provide real solutions for these patients. And if PDS is our business support solution, and that is just a great 1-2 punch to help more patients. Good.
Debbie, any thoughts on the biggest threats to dental practice today?
I think just the biggest threat is getting patients to keep returning to your office, and that patients are so insurance driven, and they don't come in because they don't think their insurance will pay for it. And that's our message that we need to communicate with our patients, is what exactly is insurance. And I have a whole other dialogue about that, because patients have a misunderstanding about what their insurance is going to pay for, and it keeps them away from their dentist, I believe.
Got it. So the biggest challenge is stickiness with patients and avoiding insurance getting in the way of that stickiness too. I mean,
Absolutely.
keeping patients just because the ideal world, and Joe said it well, is you get a patient as a young person, that and the family and a whole bunch of people can end up at that practice forever, for a long time. And you have to stay close with the patient, use your whole team to stay close with the patient. And then you got to fight through the insurance issues too. And I think it's a fascinating comment by both of you. I want to do this. We're at about 1:42 or so. What I'd like to do is wrap up at this point, and thank both of you for your involvement tremendously. To me, it's just very educational to get two seasoned, leaders in the business on the phone in the dental area and really hear some of your thoughts about what's going on in the business. And it's interesting to hear the thoughts about the maturation of the business, the growth of de novos, the real blocking and tackling issues of communications issues and insurance issues and so forth, and the different strategies of dental hygienists to help really strengthen the practice tie, plus the issue of fighting through insurance issues and so forth, and communication issues, and then on Joe talking about offering a comprehensive suite of services and also strengthen implants and so forth as another area that drives dollars, or maybe that was Debbie that said that about implants, but something we've heard before. And Joe, the constant effort to expand practices to include pediatrics, orthodontics, and so forth, is I also thought was just a great point. So Debbie and Joe, I wanted to thank you both very, very much for your time today. Very thoughtful, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to do this, and really insightful. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
I think we'll wrap up with that. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Hopefully you found it informative. And obviously, if you want to follow up with Joe and Debbie, we would love you to. We appreciate their joining us today. And our team has all of their contact information as well. So thank you very much, Joe and Debbie. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
Thank you.